We're here to talk about designing and delivering blended learning. So, Martin, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Martin Mellor, and I'm the founder and owner of Mellor Financial Training. I guess what you'd describe as a subject matter expert. So I've worked as an accountant or in varying ways for about 27 years. Last 10 years or so running my own business, and so over that period I've been working with a whole range of organisations to help people that don't have a financial background, that aren't accountants, have a better understanding of, confidence with, ability to interpret financial information.
I mean, your experience in that area, your training that you're offering is certainly something I could have valued, because I know as a new manager in my previous career, I went from having to look after myself and my own objectives to all of a sudden having a team, having a P&L to look after, a budget, all these kind of things. So, is that the kind of area that you work in?
Absolutely, and I think you make a really good point. Whilst not many people want to get involved in financials, it's almost impossible to either own your own business, run a business, be a manager, progress in your career without interacting with finance. And yet, for most
Yeah.
people, that is not something that comes naturally to them, and it isn't something that they naturally would follow. So, um, there are a few triggers typically along the way that would mean that someone might want or need some training. But I would say that the number of people who would interact with finance in some way, shape, or form in their job or their career is nearly 100%. Nearly
Yeah, and I
100%.
can, and I just remember feeling quite overwhelmed by those situations, and feel a little bit on the spot at times as
Yeah.
well. You may be in a room with, all of a sudden, you're in a room with more kind of senior people within an organisation, and you don't have the foggiest about A, what they're talking about, and B, what you're accountable for, and how much you should input on those
Yeah.
situations or not.
And what I often say to people is you'll typically find that you're suddenly part of a conversation, and that conversation moves at pace, and you might have a report in front of you or some numbers in front of you, and it feels to most people like there's someone in the room that understands that way better than they do, and they're moving around the page and they're making judgments and assessments, and everyone
Yeah.
else is kind of sat there going, don't really know where that's coming from. And so I guess behaviorally what lots of people therefore do is they just sit quietly. They don't challenge, they don't interject, because they have a fear of looking stupid or fear of looking like they don't know something that they think they should know. And I'm a firm believer that there is no reason why you should know. I also
Mm.
often say to people, quite often the person that's talking at pace doesn't know as much as they think they do. They just kind of bluster their way through. And
Yeah.
with enough jargon and language and terminology, they think that people won't challenge them. And I guess as a business, what that then does is, to my mind, it leaves effectively untapped knowledge and insight. So
Okay.
you might not know loads about the financials, but you know lots about what you do. So you think back to your career, Andy, and you think about the things that you knew about. Well, joining that together with financial performance can really drive the business forward. But if you're sat in those meetings kind of going, well, I daren't speak,
Mm.
then the business is not leveraging that knowledge and insight that you have about the stuff that you do know about. So it's an enabler to allowing businesses and people to inform business performance and business decision making.
Okay. And the training the training that you've seen out there that tries to help in that space, does it really fill the needs of what people want, or is it? I mean, from the outside looking in, it feels like it's more, how should I say it, more terminology based or technically based rather than actually the application of being able to interpret
Yeah,
something and be able to have a conversation around it.
I think it's getting better.
Okay.
I think it's getting better, but I think there's an awful lot of what I would describe lazy training. There's a lot of training that hasn't really evolved or changed in 30, 40, 50 years that is very much focused on the technicality. the
Okay.
structure of financial documents. Whereas to me, understanding the structure of a financial document is only relevant if that then enables you to look at something and understand it and understand whether it feels right, wrong, indifferent, something that you can do something about, something that you could do better. So where I come from from a training perspective is understanding how things are put together only takes you so far. It's what is that information telling you and how can you use it is the thing that takes it from a tick box exercise into something that should hopefully have real impact. And that's
Okay.
ultimately what we're striving for. And I guess the thing is, you know, there's a myriad of people providing training in this space. If you Google finance for non-finance training,
Mm.
you will get thousands and thousands of options. So picking out the stuff that's good, lots of people, in the same way that you don't know what you're looking at from a financial perspective, you probably don't know, therefore, what good training looks like.
So I was reading through our correspondence of when we first got in touch. It was actually October 2019.
Was it?
So what's that, over 4.5, 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
It's a long time. So where were you at in terms of your own business then at that point, and why was online learning? I think you broadly came in and started to speak to us about online learning. That was the broad remit. Where were you at with that, and where did online
Yeah,
learning fit in?
good question. So I suppose to help explain that, I'll just kind of slightly canter through it, almost like a timeline. So I'd be at that point in time, I'd been delivering training for probably 4 years, most of it in person, in a workshop, in a room, delivering, variations on a theme to groups of, 5, 10, 15 people.
Yeah.
A reasonable proportion of that training at that point in time was done as an associate of a bigger training provider, who have big market coverage in terms of big businesses use them. They're a well-known name in the industry. So from that perspective, good name for me to have as a kind of reference point on my CV. Maybe testing my memory, but maybe 18 months, 2 years before I met you, they'd asked if I was interested in learning how to run training courses using virtual online software. So,
Okay.
most people would think of Zoom or Teams or something similar. In actual fact, that business uses Adobe. And that's just, in many ways, that's a choice of the business in terms of what platform they use. Now, I've always thought, well, why not? Why not give it a go? Why not
Mm.
try? And I suppose here's the thing: I come at this. Training is the output or a vehicle or a mechanism for me to share knowledge and insight as an SME, rather than me being a professional trainer with 30 years training experience. So I wasn't scared by the idea of delivering sessions using online functionality. I
Yeah.
know a lot of people in this sector that were. So I guess I was a relatively early adopter of what was called live online training. So using that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And of course, roll the clock forward from when we met and COVID hit, actually it became a bit of a necessary evil and a bit of a
Mm.
lifeline for many. And lots of people at that point were forced to do things because it was the only option. My observation in doing that for a couple of years was that training in particular, as good as the online platforms are, and whether it's Adobe or Teams or Zoom or WebEx or anything, as good as they are, the material that was being used and the way it was being done was basically trying to replicate a live room, a physical workshop. And to my mind, increasingly, I was starting to form the opinion that that wasn't fit for purpose, that just rolling out a PowerPoint presentation, and the only difference, instead of people at a table doing exercises, you put them into virtual breakout rooms. And that design structure of courses, I just feel like it could be done so much better. And I guess it was a relatively serendipitous moment. Um, I think we maybe kind of our paths crossed in networking circles in local business, and I started to think there has to be a better way. There has to be a way that people can undertake financial training online and it be specifically designed to be consumed online rather than here's what we did in person, lift and drop, do it down a webcam. And that was kind of where I was at that point in time in terms of thought process, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's a scenario we still see now, you know, 3-4 years after COVID, or, you know, so obviously a lot of that stage, there was a lot of pressure and a lot of distress in training providers for, we're delivering a lot of this stuff in person and face to face. How do we transfer it online? And so they took that approach, but you know, that's still in many cases, there's still that the main approach that people are taking. They're not really seeing it as an online first piece and thinking about how do I adapt my approach and how do I create impact from an online first approach rather than transferring what we've got and bringing it straight onto online. So you were certainly ahead of the curve, and you probably still are now in terms of your approach to that. And it brings us nicely onto blended learning, which we're here to talk about today. We ended up designing a blended learning experience, and I guess we should probably define what we mean by blended learning. I mean, maybe Martin, maybe you like to, in your head, what do you see blended learning as?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? What is blended learning? And people tend to use the term hybrid as well interchangeably. And to be honest, I probably would use the term hybrid interchangeably with blended as well. Specifically for me, what that means is autonomous or asynchronous self-study interspersed with synchronous learning. So and that's quite techie language, isn't it? So what I mean by that is group sessions. Now, those group sessions could be physically co-located in a room.
Yeah.
But more often than not, they are live online. So again, using video conferencing type technology. And that is a mechanism to work people through or help them work through asynchronous or self-paced online learning. So that's what it means to me. That's what it's become. And like I say, I'm not wedded to terminology. I'm not wedded to a specific way of doing things. I guess we might come on to talk about the way in which we've delivered some of this stuff and how some of that might vary from client situation to client situation. So it's not a one size fits all, but what it is that combination of you go away and do some stuff on your own, but then you come back together with a group, the same group of people, and you will gain a number of things from both elements of that delivery.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's about that rich mix of modalities or formats that create a better experience all around and take the advantages of both. The whole hybrid versus blend thing is something that a lot of people in our industry can get quite hung up on. And to be fair, it's because there isn't agreed consensus on the clarity of some of these terms. I heard a nice analogy the other day was that a lot of people use hybrid as almost like alternatives. So you might have like a hybrid conference where you have some face-to-face sessions, and you may be able to access them online. So that's more, it's the either-or option. And someone equated it to a buffet. So you can choose. Imagine perhaps a fruit salad. So you choose which bits you have. Whereas the blended is where you're mashing everything up. So it's the smoothie of the online learning world. So like you've just suggested, it's very much around taking these normalities, but a much more joined up experience with a flow through it. So rather than just kind of ad hoc picking at pieces, it's very much a designed, human-centered experience that we can hopefully aim to have a lot more impact with some of our learners.
Yeah.
In terms of the blended learning, so we've been doing that for a number of years now. Or you've been delivering that blended learning experiences to your clients for a number of years. So I'd love to dig into a little bit more and understand a little bit more about some of the advantages or some of the experiences and learnings you've had, both from an instructor perspective from, you delivering the webinars and also creating the self-study online materials, but also the feedback you've had from your participants or students. It'd be great to have some insights on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's probably important to understand that the asynchronous, the self-paced study that supports the blended delivery that I undertake is something that with yourselves, with Candle and myself, we've developed in a way that it has some flexibility in it, but it also has structure, and I think that's really important. So I see the blended mechanism as effectively it's kind of a delivery mechanism, if you like, that holds people's hand to help them and enable them to get through learning in a way that they would struggle if they were just kind of set off with that same set of learning on their own. Now, that's not to say that someone couldn't do that and doesn't do that and wouldn't do that. That is absolutely possible. But so I suppose the first thing that I would say is that completion rates of the courses is brilliant. So in providing a structure for people, in providing a kind of regular cadence to when sessions are, to the structure, to the fact that people have access to recordings, they can still go forwards and backwards, they can still validate what they've done, they can still move around at their own speed largely, but completion rates are more than 90%. Which is great. And so compare that to virtually any other kind of learning, particularly online learning, and it's off the charts in terms of completion rate. Feedback from people is really strong. I think one of the other things is, and I guess this influences the feedback of learners, but is feedback from me as an instructor, if you like. No two cohorts are exactly the same.
Okay.
So whilst everyone gets the same elements of asynchronous learning, the conversations that we have in the group sessions vary depending on who's in the room, what they understand, what they don't understand, what they want to talk about, what they don't want to talk about, knowledge that they've got, things that they're working on. All sorts of things can affect that. And I would say, so my style and what I would have almost in my back pocket to talk about has changed and evolved over time, in the same way that what I would talk about in a face-to-face workshop has changed over time. You're always learning, you're always embedding experience from different conversations, different business scenarios, increasingly being asked to tailor content for workshops that we run. Well, blended almost does that by default because every group of people is different, and every group of people. So I can probably list you 10 questions that come up in every group at some stage, but there's another 110 questions that are different. And that's great. So as an instructor, it keeps it fresh, it keeps it new, it keeps it interesting, it keeps it varied. But at the same time, you know that you are having impact and delivering value. And I guess, nothing could be more telling than the original scope of contracts won for that kind of delivery expanded significantly over time, and a repeat amount of work, expansion into different areas, working with different parts of organizations off the back of the success of the program. So I think it's here to stay as a mechanism, but I also would imagine in 5 years' time I would deliver it slightly differently to how I deliver it now, just because natural evolution of the way in which things are done, but also the questions that people would ask.
Yeah. And it sounds like that structure, the blended learning structure that you've adapted. When perhaps we should talk a little bit about that. But I remember when we designed it, it was we've gone for it's basically a 4-week course, isn't it? A 4-week
Yeah.
program. And what you have is when you register, you can get access to some on-demand, the asynchronous elements of the welcome area, get under the skin of what the course is all about. Then it all starts with one big kickoff call, doesn't it? So you've got an
Yeah.
hour where you are welcoming people, joining, getting to connect with each other, outlining expectations, what the nature of the course would be. And then after that call, they then go away and over the next week, they then go away and do additional materials, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. So I suppose a part of success, what does success look like for me? Success looks like everyone contributing, everyone turning up to each of those group sessions. It looks like people being enthusiastic. But more than anything, I think the thing that I try and encourage in the first session, aside from explaining the technicality of the technology and how it will work and kind of where you'll find things, is what I'm trying to encourage is it's okay to be vulnerable.
Okay.
It's okay to say that you don't know and you don't understand. And success for me is like almost like the more people that I can get to the point where they go, do you know what, I just don't get that. That then enables us to do something about it. Whereas if you've got a variation of the original finance meeting where people are just kind of sat there not saying much, then I've not done my job. And that's why, so I've been fairly particular. I recommend to clients certain group sizes. There's group sizes that I will not go beyond because I feel it compromises the
Yep.
quality and the content that you're able and the way that you're able to deliver content and the way that you're able to kind of push and pull and prod and involve people. And I think commercially there's often the drive to get force numbers through. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm pretty clear that my ideal group size for blended is 8 people.
Okay.
I would do 10,
Yeah.
and I would do 6, but I wouldn't go beyond that kind of range.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess you start to lose those interactions, don't you? And you start to become.
yeah, you
You see, it's
you
easy
lose.
for people to come on the periphery, isn't it, and not really engage in the
Absolutely.
same way.
It's easy to lurk. It's easy to hide. It's easy to hide
Mm.
behind. So what you want is accountability. So part of the point of the calls is accountability. So turn up, show up,
Yeah.
share what you know, share what you don't know, try and relate to the real world. And that's where the impact comes from. But you
Yeah.
can only do that with a group size that's manageable.
And I guess that structure lends itself to, one thing we talk about at Candle Digital is it's really important to give people the opportunity to go and practice this stuff, either in the workplace or the real
Yeah.
world, whatever you're teaching. And I guess, having those, so you have weekly calls, don't you, at the same set time. So in between those weeks, they are studying materials, they're learning from the asynchronous on-demand content and the activities that are involved. They also may have some challenges they need to go away and do. But the important thing is they're going away, doing this stuff, and coming back. So it's not it's not an echo chamber. It's not all coming out of your brain to kind of
Mm.
try and transfer into their brains. It's very much go out and do this stuff, have a conversation about this, talk to someone about this, and come back and let us know, how
Mm.
did you get on? What worked well? What didn't work well? It feels like that blended learning structure really lends itself to building capabilities rather than just acquiring knowledge.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that I've become much braver at over time, as I've become more comfortable and confident in what I'm doing, I've become
Yeah.
much braver at having
Okay. Okay.
silence. Um, so I think it's really important. And again, it's one thing saying it, it's another thing doing it. Is I'll say to people up front, the group sessions, they're not an extension of teaching. So we will
Yeah. Okay.
inevitably I will inevitably try and enhance your knowledge. I will inevitably try and bust some myths or help you understand things. But I'm not coming to that session with an hour's worth of content that I'm planning on talking about. Now, equally, I do have stuff that I will talk about and plan to talk about and try and talk about, but it's not an hour's worth of teaching. The whole point of it is you come and find out what you want to know or what you need to know. And it's my job then to link those things together, to draw out commonality, to point out difference. So it's really important to be willing to just go, right, okay,
Yeah.
and wait for things to come forward rather than me force onto people what I think they want to know or ought to know or don't know. Because again, that's
Mm.
kind of lazy. That's making an assumption and a presumption about what people need, and what everyone
Yeah.
needs is something slightly different.
Yeah. And I imagine it's easy to try and fill that void, that silence. It's
Oh
who's
yeah,
going to be the first to break?
absolutely, absolutely. And so and within any group dynamic, you'll always get someone that's slightly more willing to talk than someone else,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me as well, like, what you talked there about, you're leaving room to tailor the experience or the learning intervention that you're trying to create to that specific context, that specific group. You've said 10 questions are the same every time, 110 are different, and I think that's what this affords. I
Mm.
guess if you're delivering it completely virtually, are you doing it all in one day? You don't have that. They don't have that opportunity to go away and reflect and do this stuff, whatever you challenge them to do in the workplace, and come back. So it's difficult to apply it to the context. The challenge you've got with entirely online, entirely asynchronous, or what typically we call e-learning, is that there's lots of benefits, but lots of detriments. But you're not having someone there that's going to hold you accountable and want you to come with new
Definitely,
stuff
yeah.
every week. There's not a certain cadence, so it feels like that blended learning approach has served you well.
It has. It really has, and serve, and more importantly, I suppose, serve the clients well. Like I
Yeah,
say, ultimately, what we're looking for is delivering training, but delivering training with impact. So,
yeah,
and it kind of stands to reason, doesn't it, that commercially, what would work for me is something that works for clients. So,
yeah.
it absolutely has. Like I say, it's evolved. As you said when we first started talking, it wasn't even on the radar really. It wasn't something
Mm,
that I was thinking about, but it feels like the right answer. I think it's interesting. It even still though, it isn't necessarily the solution for everybody. I think that's the other
yeah,
thing is
absolutely.
too often in life and in training in particular, people get forced into kind of boxes, don't they, of this is the way it is, this is the way it should be done, this is what you can have. And I think to be able to give people flexibility, both in terms of the way that you deliver, but then also within that blended solution, the flexibility
Mm.
it affords is integral.
I think you're totally right about the boxes. I think a lot of training per se is provided on, or is often designed on, logistical reasons or cost reasons. The two are interlinked. Whereas I think the approach that we took was, let's have a think about, I guess, kind of three key people. The first one is you. What do you want to do in terms of your business, and where do you want to take it? And what does a blended learning approach give you? It was
Mm,
about the client. So, because typically the client isn't necessarily the learner or the participant. So what would work well for them, and what would be an attractive offering for them? And then for the end person, the participant or the student,
mm,
what is going to have the biggest impact? If you've got someone that wants to go from unconfident to confident, what's the best way to design this experience and deliver it
mm.
to have the biggest impact? But I wanted to ask about you. Like, what has this, compared to some of the other options that you do deliver, what has blended learning given you, both in terms of perhaps commercial gain, but your own development as well?
Uh, yeah, good question. I think commercially, it's been a really viable way of delivering a service because, in effect, I suppose the old adage about selling your time for money. I am someone that has historically sold my time for money, and I still do.
Yeah.
Blended learning slightly decouples your time from the commercial gain that you can drive. Um, it creates a consistency. I've talked quite a bit, haven't I, about the potential for each group being different, but there's also within that a commonality and a a consistency in terms of the asynchronous stuff. So it's enabled me to deliver for clients that geographically I would have struggled to deliver
Okay.
for in the volume that I have.
Mm.
So it's not to say that you wouldn't travel to somewhere for a day, but actually, this is a far more from a work life blend or whatever. It fits, and I think if anything, the key going forward is to try and maximize the amount of time spent delivering, and again,
Yeah.
kind of almost time box that delivery. So commercially, it's been great. Personally, I think it's opened my eyes. Again, you don't know what you don't know. I've
Mm.
definitely evolved my style as a facilitator, so I think it's a different thing. Much of the subject matter expertise that I would deliver in a day's training is embedded in the asynchronous system.
Mm.
So I'm not doing the heavy lifting, if you like, of the SME element. I do some of that in the calls, but it's much more the facilitation. It's much more the bringing people in, drawing out their experience, asking them the questions. As I said previously, the sitting there potentially in silence, the prompting, the nudging,
Yeah.
the scenario. And I'll give you a great example. My wife was sat kind of her office is alongside mine when we're working at home, and there's a bit of noise transfer you can hear. And I came off a session just before Christmas with a client, and the group were amazingly engaged in what we were doing. And she said, I could really tell in the tone of your voice
Mm.
how excited you were about the conversation. She said I could hear a difference, and that was at one level that was great, but it also made me kind of think: so how can I get to that level with every group? And like all things in life, there is variability, isn't there? You're not
Yeah.
100% in control of everything, but I've definitely developed and evolved my facilitation skills, and I think
Yeah.
that then can play out in any number of ways.
It's really interesting how you talk about it's almost you flipped roles.
Mm,
So and it comes back to the whole educational thing of it's called a flipped classroom, which many
mm,
people would equate with blended learning. But you've gone from you're delivering training at
mm,
times, particularly when you're doing virtual workshops. But you've actually gone with this, you've gone from a trainer to a facilitator. That's quite
yeah.
a that's quite a big leap. And I imagine out of the two options, facilitating something and seeing the magic happen of you and being a catalyst for all these kind of conversations and bringing something together must be quite rewarding.
Oh, massively. Yeah, massively. But again, as well, I think sometimes, we as people, as human beings, we naturally gravitate to what feels safe and what feels
Mm.
comfortable. And I think so. It has pushed me. It's pushed me out of my comfort zone, and to the extent that I went and sought out advice and guidance on my facilitation style. It's not perfect.
Okay.
I sit here now. I'm not the finished product when it comes to facilitation skills, but I do think I'm considerably better than I was a few years ago when I started. And I think that then gives you the confidence to say, well, I could go and do that, or I could go and do the other, or I could take on this opportunity because I know that I've successfully managed hundreds of people through this process. Um,
And do you
so,
think there's something about not being the finished product? Because
yeah.
I think one of the again, one of the beauties of blended learning is they have access to you, but not all of you.
Mm,
So if it was to be a virtual session, delivered entirely through Zoom, you're on 100%, and
mm,
you're teaching things that perhaps this isn't the best delivery format for that information or for that helping build that
yeah.
skill. Whereas this, they almost get the best of you. They get they get the anecdotes, they get the facilitation, they get you steering rather than teaching or training, should we say? So
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
that's quite a nice position to be in.
Yes, I think so. And and frankly, it's easier to bring energy to an hour
Mm.
session than it is to bring energy to a 7 hour session.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to maintain. And so much of facilitation and delivery is about energy, managing energy, pointing energy. So I think that's really important.
I think you had a very novel approach to your training generally when we first met you, and one of the approaches that we took, and in part of the design of working together, is how can we make finance relatable? How can we, because we knew there was going to be quite a broad range of people that would, from backgrounds, whether it be a PLC or a small business or, an LLP, whatever, we're going to be potentially enrolling on this program. So I think, how do you make it relatable? That's a good way for people to learn from each other. So we went down the scenario route, didn't we, in terms of the online content, and built 4 or 5 scenarios that people could learn from. How's that gone down?
Really well. It's typically, so, cadence of the course. The first call is all about, right, this is what it's going to be, this is how it's going to work, it's safe, be vulnerable, etc. Well, the call after a week, I always do a temp check on how did you find it? And invariably the feedback is really like the system, really like the way it's built, really like the characters, really like the scenario. Because I think lots of people, their perception, they hear finance training and their brain tells them it's going to be a certain thing. And then what they're presented with is something that's quite different.
Yeah.
It's been a really powerful way of delivering.
I mean, it was very much kind of real world orientated, wasn't it? So we had one person, I think, is it Charlie, who has the coffee shop, who's just getting started up, and we have, is it Sergei, who's the property mogul, and you're learning different things as you go through it. And for us, that was a real learning experience for us. Having building those situations, putting it in front of people, and seeing what the response was. I think that's something that, I'm really glad we went on, because I think it's a very relatable way of people being able to marry their context with somebody else's context, but not doing it in a way where they feel like they are being taught, in a sense.
That's it. And I suppose ultimately you come back to what am I aiming for? What I'm aiming for is that someone comes away from that learning and they don't just go, right, I've done the learning, I've got the certificate. It's, we learned that on that course, and now I'm being presented with this situation. Well, in giving people a breadth of situations in the actual material itself, you are increasing the potential that they almost get to test out. One of the beauties of slightly niche finance reference here, but one of the beauties of running forecasts and financial plans is you, in a spreadsheet, in a safe environment, whatever tool that you use, you create and test scenarios and create and test decision making. Well, in many ways, that's the same thing that we're trying to do with this blended learning. Is you're presenting people the opportunity to think about how might they get involved in a conversation. Another sort of key element of the build with you guys that works really well, and actually we both know that this is something that might improve even further, is rather than just at the end of each section have a kind of boring knowledge checker, we make it a conversation. We make it a meeting that you're going to, a conversation that you might have in the real world. So you're arming people with solutions, with answers, with possibilities. And that's really important, because so much training is, I've passed, I've got my certificate, that's it, I'll go. We were worked on our garage recently, and I found all my GCSE certificates from school. You sort of think to yourself, it meant the absolute world at the time, but since then, what have they done? Well, they just sat in the folder.
Is it alongside your national record of achievement?
Yeah, something like
you
that.
Find that? Yeah. Well, talking about kind of future plans and forecasts, where do you see this going? What are your, ambitions, or where would you like to take it over the next couple of years?
I try not to get too far ahead of myself. I don't see it as the only element of my offering.
Yeah.
But I still see it as a key part of my offering. I see it as something that can develop and evolve. So almost, I suppose, a couple of things. Number one, let's not ignore AI. I think AI can and will make this even better. You're already testing things out. We've done some kind of fairly high level tests of how AI could improve things. And then almost, if you imagine that what we have at the moment is kind of at the core of things, I feel like we can build out from that and create greater coverage, there's a really logical question at the end of the course. Well, what next?
Yeah.
And I think that for me is the aim over the next couple of years is to expand out. I'm working
Okay.
on links into broader leadership training. So where finance is a component and a key skill, but it's not the only component and key skill at different levels. So, level of seniority, therefore level of complexity. So that's what I'd really like to achieve in the next couple of years is almost refresh what there already is, make it, we talked earlier about kind of being slightly ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
I don't want to fall back just into the pack. So I want to push forward, want to keep delivering for clients. And I think the reality is the world is changing. So what clients want and need now is not going to be the same thing that they'll want and need in
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5 years time. So trying to stay ahead of the curve and expand the offering and have an impact on even more people.
Exciting times. I think just to wrap up, for anyone that's thinking about blended learning and starting on this journey, any kind of recommendations or tips or any things you think they should be thinking about before they start?
Well, I guess a couple of things. At a high level, I would say put the learner at the heart of everything that you do. So
Yeah.
too often people's solution is about them, not about
Yeah.
I've
What
lost
they want
count
to
of
teach.
the number of conversations I've had, and you know this because actually this has an impact on your world as well, where people say, "Oh, I think I'm going to develop an online course," and what they mean is, I want to try and create a revenue stream, a residual revenue stream that doesn't really involve any effort from me. And what
Yeah.
they're not really thinking about does that do anything for their intended recipient? Is there a market for it? Are people interested in it? Will they get anything from it? They're thinking about themselves. So I think first and foremost, put the learner at the heart of what you do, and secondly, without blowing smoke up your backside, find some experts, find some expertise.
Yeah.
I think we've worked really well. The broader Candle team and myself, it feels like a partnership. You have knowledge and skills that I just don't. You push me, you prod me, you poke me in terms of how we're doing things, ideas, creatively and technically. So again, there's a proliferation, isn't there, of DIY type options. Personally, I think if there's sufficient demand and there's sufficient need, do it properly. Don't do it
Yeah.
yourself,
And
because I
I
think you
think
can
that
tell.
uniqueness that we've created together has helped you stand out from the crowd and win some of the contracts that you've won. If it had been
Yeah.
a fairly generic vanilla offering, I'm not sure you would have had the same success.
No, agreed. And I think, even if it's just down to, I feel proud of what we've done, of what we've got, and I use the word we. I feel proud of that, and therefore, I'll stand in front of anyone and go, this is what we've got, and I think that's important. I think if it's some videos that you've cobbled together yourself online, I'm not sure that really cuts the mustard.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the insights. It's wonderful to hear about. I think blended learning. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people. But I think to echo what you're saying, it comes back down to the person you're trying to influence and also what the client wants pragmatically as well. Putting them at the center of the design and figuring out what kind of learning experience. It'll probably be blended, in terms of using
Yeah,
loads of it. Could be there's a lot of formats and modalities beyond just virtual and on demand. So putting those people at the center and figuring out what kind of experience is going to have the best impact, and work backwards from there. But thank you very much for your insights, Martin. Lovely to speak to you.
cheers, Andy.